The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Okay, everybody, we're going to get started. So if you want to take your seat, Bernie's going to do a quick announcement before we start, and then I have a couple housekeeping things after his announcement.
So for those of you who are listening, I'm Bernie Simons, which I assume you know my voice after 9 years. But anyway, I want to say that we've got a webinar that we do monthly. We used to do them weekly in the beginning of the pandemic. So this Friday is the webinar that I'll be doing. And I just want to give you a preview that one of the items that I will mention on Friday is, Appendix K. And I just heard from somebody asking the question about when does Appendix K end? Is it in January? The answer is no. The Appendix K will be through June 30th of 23. So just so that people know that that's where we are. We're still in obviously the public health emergency that the feds announced, and keep moving with their authorizations. I think they have a 90-day window to keep authorizing this, and the secretary authorized that. Our secretary Schrader is very supportive and said yes, June 30th is a good date for Appendix K. So I just wanted to share that because I heard earlier with somebody say Appendix K is ending January 31st. So I don't want people to be misinformed. So that's my announcement.
Thanks, Bernie. This is Nick. I'm introducing myself because of the people on the webinar. We got some good feedback from them that when panels are up, they would like for panel members to say their name before they speak, which is good advice. So third panel, remember that. Karen, I think you and John are probably going to be fine. Your voices are distinct enough. Yeah. And there's only 2 of you. The other thing I just wanted to mention is that we're getting questions on the webinar platform for those that are logged in. Fantastic. We will absolutely be doing an FAQ from this event. You'll notice that we didn't take questions from the audience. That was somewhat intentional, partially because we asked for questions ahead of time, and many of you submitted some really great questions that we've attempted to weave into the panel. The other thing is we're here, right? DDA is all around the perimeter of the room, available to ask questions. I'm here, the regional directors are here. So if you have questions about anything you heard, you have a question for any of the panelist members, that's why we're all here in person, right? So utilize that. I know in the break I talked to about 5 or 6 of you. So it was great to meet some of you in person and actually talk to some of you. So, okay, I don't want to cut into Karen and John's time, but I did want to kind of give a little preamble. Is that the right word? All right, preamble. So I think, we just had a large conversation and we just ended the last panel talking about flexibilities. And, we have services in LTSS. We've spent a lot of time. Bernie's invested in making sure that we have waiver services that are flexible to meet people's needs, right? And Karen and John are going to actually talk about how we operationalize the conversation we just had about flexibility. And, I think from a DDA perspective, I had mentioned it at the conference. I've mentioned in a couple other settings. Bernie mentioned it this morning. We absolutely support stacking, braiding, blending, and it needs to be a part of the person-centered planning process based upon what individuals want for their own outcomes. So I'm going to sit down and I'm going to turn it over to Karen and to John. John, you're not losing anything. You're not losing your marbles. John is not up here at the table. He is participating in the internet, the World Wide Web, and you will hear his voice, but you will not see him. So I'm going to turn over the mic to Karen, and you've got an hour and 15.
Thanks, and welcome everybody who's in the room. This is Karen Lee, and I'm the Executive Director at SEEC, and we're a Maryland and DC provider of services, and we're in the DC metro area. And I've been doing this job for 32 years. I started when I was 12, of course. That's the only way to explain how long I've been doing it. And I'm joined today by my colleague, John Butterworth. And Dr. Butterworth is from the University of Massachusetts, the Institute on Community Inclusion. And he also participates with Maryland through SELN, as well as the data that we all fill out. And he does a lot of incredibly great work. We've been colleagues and partners in a lot of this work for a long time. And I'm really thrilled to be presenting with him. So John, I'm gonna let you go ahead and start.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Sorry I'm not there up on the podium in person, but it's a wonderful opportunity to talk to you about this change. And I think it's fair to say that the topic is stacking, braiding, and blending of funding and supports. But what we're really talking about is transforming a system to a more individualized, person-centered model. So if we could have a slide change. We're in a period where there's been a lot of change. You guys have experienced a lot of change in Maryland, and I appreciate that. This change to the new service model is complex, not simple. But ultimately, it's about listening to people and hearing what they're asking for in terms of being able to really control their lives, the kinds of supports they get, what their day looks like. It's a shift at its heart from a program model to a more individualized, person-centered way of organizing and providing support. So that means moving away from thinking in terms of 6 days of services that happen at a set time and you leave the house at 7 o'clock in the morning to be there. It's more flexible than that. And that's more complicated, but also hopefully more fun, more exciting, more energizing for everybody who's involved. This is driven by a lot of things. It's obviously driven by the settings rule and some of its expectations, but that's grounded in what people have asked for. It's also grounded very much in the values of employment first and our need to be more effective at supporting people and their employment goals. You know, our core challenge here is how we listen to people and how we design supports. Some of this comes from what we've learned in the pandemic, and I think what really fascinates me is how much people's experiences in the pandemic synchronize with and drive some of this change to a more person-centered model. When we've asked people, and in Massachusetts, we've spent time hearing from individuals and family members about what they want as things restart and life gets back to something closer to what it was before. And what they tell us is they love the flexibility. You know, they loved being able to pick and choose the activities they joined in, even if they were virtual. But people also said they wanted more time in the community and they wanted more work, more real work opportunities. And they wanted more independence. And I think there's some wonderful stories about people who were getting really close supervision in a work site, but with the pandemic, that wasn't an option. More people in the work site wasn't a good thing. And there are people who really blossomed and grew in terms of both their independence and also the kinds of supports they got from their coworkers and friends at work. So the core idea here is really a life filled with authentic community life engagement at work, you know, helping people choose what they do and when they do it, and the supports they receive. Next slide. And fundamentally, I don't know if the next slide happened, but I'm not seeing it on my screen. There we go. You know, fundamentally, the change is in our relationship with individuals and how we support the different parts of their lives and how, on a very personal level, these pieces intersect and overlap. Next slide. It's driven in part, you know, well, not in part. It's driven strongly by what people want. I mean, let's not forget part of this is employment first. And these are national numbers because we have these numbers for Maryland, but not in this most recent round of the National Core Indicators Project. You know, what's striking to me is consistently year to year, when the National Core Indicators Project asks people what they want and asks people about jobs, about half of people who don't have a job, and by a job here we mean a community job, about half of people who don't have a job say that they want a job in the community. I think even more importantly, and this really speaks to the kinds of conversations we have with people, and it speaks to what support coordination does with folks. Of those half who want a job, again, pretty consistently year to year, something like a third to 40%, only something like a third to 40% have a goal in their individual service plan. So, you know, kind of a core question is, how do we help people have more intentional experiences like volunteering, job exploration, informational interviews, discovery, guided employment conversations that take them to that place? And this idea of stacking, braiding, and blending funding and supports is all about making those kinds of opportunities available. Next slide. So how are we doing? And I'm going to just do a little bit of data. People who know me know that I spend a portion of my time thinking about data and trends. Our institute has studied trends under contract with the federal government since 1988 in employment services and employment outcomes. And we've really struggled to make employment move forward. In about 1999, the growth in employment that happened in the early days of the supported employment movement completely flattened out for a little over 10 years. And we're just getting back to growth. Starting in around 2012 here, you begin to see a surge in integrated employment. But more importantly and significantly, as we think about what it means to be in the community and of the community, the majority of folks spend time in non-work supports, both community-based and program-based. And our real challenge is how we create a pathway from non-work supports to a chance to achieve that goal that people have of integrated employment. Next slide. So in 2018-19, which is kind of the last national, excuse me, national core indicators data point we have before the pandemic, nationally, and it's important to note that the investments and work you guys have done in Maryland put you in a different place. We'll look at Maryland data in just a minute. But nationally, about 16% of people in 2018-19 worked in an individual competitive integrated job. About 7% in a group supported job of some kind. But the really critical thing as we think about the changes we need is the majority of people's time is spent in facility-based settings, program-based settings, either sheltered employment, facility-based work, or the biggest consistently area people spend time is unpaid center-based or program-based activities. Oh, could you go back for a sec? Oh, no, we can, yeah, go back for a sec. Somehow we skipped forward here. Next slide. No, I think we skipped a slide, but that's okay. During the pandemic, 2020, 2021, all of those numbers on the previous slide decreased. So we dropped to about 14%, 11% of people in individual jobs. Only about 17% of people were spending time in community activities. Still, the highest activity was program-based. Even in the middle of the pandemic, was program-based kinds of activities, non-work activities. But this is Maryland, and it gives a sense of some of the places that you guys shine. So back in October 2019, before the pandemic, 26% of people worked in individual jobs. That's significantly better than 10%, fully 10% better than the national average. You also did really well in participation in community-based activities, non-work or community engagement. Fully 48% of people had those opportunities. But the highest number still comes out at facility-based non-work, day hab, program-based activities. That's still a challenge we have to begin to move people more towards being fully engaged in the community. I think the other thing that I would draw from this slide, and we'll come back to it in just a second, is if you add all those percents up for 2019, it comes out to well over 100%. It's more like 150%. So as we talk about stacking, braiding, and blending, you guys have been doing that for a long time. That reflects the fact that people are doing more than one thing in the course of their week and in the course of the day supports that they get from you guys and with funding from DDA. All of those numbers dropped again significantly early in the pandemic. Maryland did better at sustaining people in jobs. Your drop to 17% compares to a national drop of something closer to 50%. Involvement in group supported jobs and facility-based work dropped considerably. Again, facility-based non-work, other than no activity, which is the problem of the pandemic, was the highest level of participation. Next slide. but you've surged back pretty well. So individual jobs are almost where they were pre-pandemic. Community participation is back up to 30%, and now is even with program-based kinds of non-work activities. Number of people, and this is May 2022, involved in no activity has dropped back. One more data slide. Next slide, please. Oh, maybe we're not going to have one more data slide. The one more data slide just talked about the kind of wraparound that already has happened and has been happening in supports, and over a third, something about a third of people who have a community-based job, so let's talk specifically about an individual competitive integrated job, are also involved in some sort of non-work activity. So community engagement and how we think about how people's lives look and patch things together is an important part of creating a whole meaningful day for folks. This slide highlights the fact that there's increasing attention to this at a federal level too. It reflects, this is the cover page to some interagency guidance that was released earlier this fall, just last month. A framework for community engagement, a pathway to competitive integrated employment. You can get the full guidance on the Rehabilitation Services Administration website. If you just Google that title, you'll get it. But it reflects an interagency effort that includes RSA, that's vocational rehabilitation, the Administration on Community Living, the Department of Education, and others. The Office of Disability Employment Policy, which is in the Department of Labor, to rethink people's pathway to employment and to really put a stake in the ground about the importance of community engagement. And community engagement, particularly as a pathway to employment. The guidance recognizes that movement from unpaid activities to employment is a critical part of employment first. And it's consistent with our research that supports authentic community engagement as an essential part of the pathway to work. Karen's going to define community life engagement in more detail, but just, simply it's centered in membership and life in the community. And to me, that means sustained activities, sustained relationships with people in environments in the community. And maybe most importantly, it's just more than just passing through. Next slide. It's important to think about community life engagement as an outcome by itself. Having those relationships, being part of your community, having a place at the music store, at the book club, at an art class, all of those things are meaningful outcomes in and of themselves. But they're also a pathway to employment, a chance for exploration, discovery, learning, building the relationships that lead you on a pathway to employment. And as your own data suggests, it's important as a wraparound activity. So people who are employed, but it's maybe not filling up their day, what's the rest of it look like? And that's the wraparound piece. Next slide. We think about community engagement. Our research in community life engagement goes back almost 20 years at this point, and is focused on trying to understand how, as a human service system, we're supporting people to be part of their communities, what it means to be part of your communities, how we organize and structure services in ways and set up value structures for our services that support people to be fully engaged in their community. This current piece of research kind of centered on 4 guideposts that provide that kind of guidance. They come from a set of expert interviews. They come from case studies of providers who have been doing this kind of work. And they've led to a variety of products that you can find on ICI's websites about the practical parts of implementing this, most importantly, a community life engagement toolkit that also includes a self-assessment and fidelity scale that gives you a chance to kind of check in on where you are. But just very quickly, 4 key guideposts. To what extent are we doing an effective job of individualizing supports for each person? What does it mean to be person-centered, and how do we make sure each person's day doesn't look like everybody else's day, but matches their personal goals? The second is the strategies we use to promote community membership. And to me, membership and contribution is the key concept that differentiates this from just taking trips into the community. It's relationships, it's having a place where you're known and recognized. The 4th guidepost has to do with social capital, how we use human and social capital to decrease dependence on paid supports. We know that the best path to jobs is through relationships and networking. We also know that we don't do a very good job of using relationships and networking in supporting people in their job searches. We also know that people are truly successful if they become well supported by their community. That doesn't leave out the paid support piece, but are there relationships in the workplace with coworkers, in the classes you take with other participants in the classes? Are you being successful in building relationships that help people be successful in those settings? And finally, ensuring that supports are outcome oriented and regularly monitored. And as Karen talks through kind of examples of implementing this, she'll talk about some of that. So I think at this point, Karen, is it back to you?
Sure, thanks. Thanks so much, John. I'm gonna move down. This is Karen Lee, and I'm gonna get in front of people here and step down. Hope everybody can see me. I'm gonna do a short definition section because I think there's people in this room who may not know all these definitions. I think it's important. So John's organization has been studying community life engagement. That's a title that they came up with, which is so much better than what they started with, which was community-based non-work. So thank you so much, John, for getting rid of that definition, because that title, community life engagement. And then Maryland started off with community development services, CDS. That's the name we call it in Maryland. And then the federal government, when John showed you earlier the picture of the memo that came out that I think everybody really should familiarize themselves with, which gives you permission, and not only gives you permission, but recommends that you do a combination of these services. They call it community engagement. We're talking about the same thing. Those 3 things are the same thing. CDS, community life engagement, that's the research team. They're the research team that's been doing the research on this and created the guideposts. Community engagement is what the folks at the federal level want to call it. And John and I were on the call with the folks at the federal level when we kind of hashed out some of these names. And so we're all saying the same thing. So I just wanted to make sure that we're on the same page around that. The other thing I want us to do a definition on is stacking, braiding, and blending to make sure people understand that concept. And it's basically using multiple forms of funding to get what they want. That first panel was brilliant. It was a great kickoff for today. And thank you to that panel, because they all said the same thing over and over again. Good job picking those folks, because they all said the same message. It was wonderful, even though they all came from different perspectives and different organizations. But what we're talking about when we say braiding, blending, and stacking is how you combine different funding sources. Today, we're only talking about braiding, blending, and stacking within DDA. Most of the time, we're talking about adding in things like doors and Ticket to Work, and other kinds of funding sources, Medicaid, personal care, other kinds of things, CFC possibly. So you can braid, blend, and stack within DDA, and you can also do it external. You can bring in external dollars as well. Today, what we're focusing on is the braiding, blending, and stacking of DDA services. And what we're really going to talk about now, as Nick said, is how do you operationalize what that first panel said? They all talked about starting with the person, not with the program. They all talked about pre-planning and having a real discussion, a cup of coffee, a trip to Golden Corral, wherever it is, but to having a real discussion about what people say. And then you bring in John's data, and what we find out from John's data is most people want to work. But it's scary, right? Because a lot of people have been in center-based programs, they've been in non-work situations. How do you move from this segregated, separate situation into employment? That's a really difficult thing. It's a jump for us and it's a jump for them, for the people that we provide supports to. And that's what we're going to talk about, how you get creative to help people move along in their life juncture, where they want to go, where they want to go with their life. And so that's why we're here talking today. And we're going to talk to you a little bit about how we make that move, what the progress is. I want to tell you something, and I absolutely promise this. As Bernie said, we've been an early adopter. SEEC has actually been in LTSS, as many of you have, since November of 2020, because we went in for personal supports and supported living. And then since July 1st of 2021, we've been in 100% in LTSS. It's clunky at first. You don't have the systems you need to do it smoothly. You'll get there. I absolutely promise you, you'll get there. With every billing cycle, with every new PCP, everything you'll get there. It's okay to not be perfect at first. I think, I want to thank Onesta and her team. Do you realize of the five early adopters, 4 of them had services in her region? I mean, think about the infrastructure they had to do to recreate how they did it. And that's what we have to do as providers. We have to think differently about services. As CCS agencies, you have to think differently about services. And that means if you send me an email saying, I'm looking for a day hab for somebody, I'm not going to answer it. As CCSs, you got to be more specific. I'm working with Joe and he wants to work and he wants to be a part of his community. Is this something your organization can help me with? Right? So we've got to think differently about how we do services. Today, I'm going to share with you some stories about how we do that. And I want to thank John and his colleague, Jen Swinski, who is created these guideposts that we're going to go through. This is the infrastructure you need to make these services happen that panel 1 was talking about. And it may mean you have to do things differently. You might need new job descriptions. You might need new processes. You might need to do funding different. You need a different infrastructure to provide different services. Don't be worried. You'll make mistakes. You'll get it wrong. And then you'll correct it and you'll get better over and over and over again. You'll work better at your CCS relationships. You'll work better with the regional office. Every plan you send might get rejected for the first couple of weeks, first couple of times. You'll get better at it. I promise you, you'll get better at it. So we use these at SEEC, these 4 guideposts: individualized, services, membership, social capital, and outcome oriented. I love these. This was just brilliant. And the work they did to get these took a long time and they got a lot of help from other folks. But this is a really super great way of thinking about how to organize your supports. You can go forward. So you know this picture, right? You've all seen this picture before, whether it's in what you do every day or when you've gone to visit people. It's a group of people with disabilities all together doing kind of the same thing. So the guideposts could be your guideposts for not just CDS. They could be your guideposts for everything you do in your organization. They're really wonderful. From individualized supports, from something like this to individualized. The next one, next slide, to this. And by the way, I want to let you know that I did talk to everybody that we support at SEEC who's in these pictures, and they said it was okay to share their stories, and I've got some stories to share. So this is Eric. He's buying his own lunch, and then he's having he's at a bookstore. This is Jessica. She wanted to get a Halloween costume, so they went up there. So it's very, very individualized. Individualized, next slide, please. Individualized doesn't mean one-on-one. Individualized doesn't mean one-on-one. And we're going to show you a video in a few seconds to show you exactly this. So these are two guys that work, and on the days that they're not working, they're hanging out together and they work with their staff to create their own schedule. One of them loves planes and one loves cars, so they went down to the Air and Space Museum together. Individualized does not mean one-on-one. Individualized means that you listen to folks. How do you institutionalize, or how do you organizationally do that? And the next slide. And this is a video. So this video features Graham and Jessica, and these are the two things that they said to me. Graham wants you to know that he likes to work but doesn't want to work full
SEEC
time.
supports people with intellectual and developmental disabilities to live, work, and thrive. Mercedes is a community engagement coach. She supports Jessica and Graham 3 days a week to facilitate their engagement with the community in a positive and meaningful way. Today, we are learning more about their typical day. Mercedes first picks up Graham and drives to Silver Spring. There, they meet Jessica, who takes Metro access from her group home. Jessica doesn't live in Silver Spring, but this neighborhood is where she chooses to spend her days being familiar and making friends. Today, the three decide to walk to Starbucks and order their favorite drinks. Jessica and Graham both know exactly what they like and have their own money to spend, while Mercedes stands by to be sure the transaction goes smoothly. They all take a moment to sit and enjoy the morning. Jessica spends time on her iPad, writing a text to her mom, while Mercedes and Graham review the day's schedule. Looking ahead to next week, Graham lets Mercedes know what activities he would like to do. One of their favorite things to do together is to visit the Silver Spring Library. There they browse and look at books, picking their favorites to check out with their own library cards. While Jessica reads her new book, Graham decides he would prefer working on his word puzzle. Often they see people they recognize in chat, but today is a quieter morning. At 11:15, the three walk downtown for lunch. The planned lunch spot is Mod Pizza, but it ends up being closed, so they adjust. Graham knows where he can go and still get a slice he likes to satisfy his pizza cravings, while Jessica opts to eat at Doghouse. They walk together to Jessica's Metro Access pickup spot. From there, her ride will take her to meet with Mercedes and Graham at MLK Pool. This is where Graham likes to go to swim on Wednesdays. It is a common misconception that people with disabilities are not capable of making their own decisions. At SEEC, we believe differently. Mercedes supports Jessica and Graham in a way that gives them choice and control over their own lives, and encourages Jessica to do many activities independently, even though her disabilities make it sometimes challenging. Community engagement allows neighbors to better see the people we support as members of their own community.
So that's a great example of together but individualized. You can do it. Together but individualized. You saw that Graham was working on a word puzzle while Jessica was checking out a book. They went to different places to eat, right? They took different transportation there. Graham uses this as a wraparound service. We're very intentional about talking about those three things that John said earlier. Community engagement, or CDS, is meant for three things: as an outcome of itself, right? That's what people want to do, as a path to employment, and as a wraparound to employment. This is the answer to people who may not choose to or be able to work full time right out of the box. This is the answer. That's why we're talking about this. You can make the transition with folks into employment because we heard people want to work, right? They make this transition. Even if, as an employment first state, even if somebody says, I don't want to work, your job is to help them to move in that direction. Even if they say right now, I don't want to work, your job is to help them move in that direction. And you can use CDS to do that. Okay? So we can go on to the next one. So I wanted to share, go on. So I wanted to share with you, and Graham said it was okay to do this. This is what his current funding looks like. He's got employment supports because he works a couple of days a week. He's got some ongoing because he gets one-on-one support, and he has some follow along, okay? He has community development services as his wraparound. Some of it is for one-on-one, and some of it is one-on-4. Okay, and then he gets, at home, he gets 10 hours of personal support. This is what his plan looks like. This is how we have braided and stacked services. And I want to tell you that, Tona, I want to raise your hand. And Kelly, raise your hand. Those are the directors at SEEC who are the employment and the CE, community engagement directors. And they'll be available during the break if you want to ask any questions. And then also DDA is making it possible to get some technical assistance if you want to know how we structure this, job descriptions, organizational, that kind of stuff. Okay, we can go on to the next. So here's the second guidepost, membership, community membership. So when 4 guys with disabilities are on their own bowling team, that's nice, but they're not really members of that bowling alley, right? They're not participating as full members of the community. They're not on a bowling alley where somebody can pick them up. They're reliant on the staff to do that. So this is more what we're looking for. Next slide. That community, promoting that community membership and contribution. Are you a part of a team? Asking yourself. So Stacy talked about the great way that they do the scheduling, where they have color-coded schedule. If you can scan people's individual schedules and say, litmus test, does this activity promote community membership? Because we know that this is how people get to jobs. We know that this is how people get to jobs, by having community membership and community access and community relationships. I've got a little bug in John's ear right now about us doing some research together around the quality of people's jobs who have used community engagement prior to employment. Because I have a sneaking suspicion, and I know that we at SEEC can demonstrate, at least on the qualitative side, that people end up with better jobs when they've had more experience in the community and have relationships and have membership. Next slide. Okay, so I'm going to talk about Charlie, and what Charlie said to me when I asked him if I could talk about him, he said he wanted you to know that he's very successful at his job. He works at Sprinkles. It's a weird situation, of course, an ice cream store. He only works part-time in the winter, but he works full-time in the summer. And so we needed that flexibility Kathy was talking about. We needed that flexibility in his services. So when he's not working, he has wraparound supports, right? He has those wraparound supports. So he's taking some mindful classes. We tend to work with people who may have come into their services with a behavior program, or having had some anger management issues or frustration. They don't have a lot of community experiences. And so we work with folks while they're on their path to employment and while they're in employment. We work with them to increase their ability to handle frustration. And so there's a lot of mindfulness things happening, whether it's a yoga class or deep breathing class or coming up with strategies for how to take a break, that kind of thing. These are some of the things that he does when he is not working. So our employment department and our community engagement department both work with him. Okay, next slide. So this is what his funding supports look like. right? So he's got employment supports, he's got the ongoing and some follow along because sometimes he needs drop in. I will tell you, we don't have 100% guidance on this because we're new at this in Maryland, but we use a rule of thumb that if a person needs more than 20% of their hours of direct staffing, we flip from follow along to ongoing. So if we're just dropping in a couple times a month just to see how people are doing, that's follow along. That's what we use, follow along. But we know that there are times in people's lives when they're going to need, where they have a new manager or they have a new task or something like that, when they're going to need more intensive supports. And so if we have to increase the number of direct supports to somebody in an employment situation, we use the average of about 20% of the hours that they work. If we have to increase that to 20%, we flip over to ongoing. So we always make sure that there is some ongoing there, even if they're stable in their job, because something might happen where we need to get in there. And then the CDS he's got, and he has residential supports with another provider. Okay, so go ahead. This is my favorite one. I got to tell you, this is my favorite. Increasing social capital to decrease dependence on paid staff. This again, like that first one when we talked about being independent, being directed by the person, doesn't mean one-on-one. This does not mean a staff won't be there. This does not mean decreasing dependence on staff does not mean a staff won't be there, maybe someday. But what kind of low-tech and high-tech options are we using to decrease the staff? And you can just picture it, right? So somebody goes into an ice cream shop and the staff says, tell them what you want, tell them what you want. And now all of a sudden the clerk at the ice cream shop, who are they looking at? They're looking at the staff. They're not looking at the person anymore. They've just disappeared. So how do we teach staff? And this is a really important staff training piece. How do we teach the staff, that our direct support professionals, to get out of the way? How do we talk about this very issue? We talk about decreasing dependence. So when we saw Eric earlier paying for his own shake, you've just decreased your dependence on paid staff because it wasn't the paid staff. So when you saw Graham go in and got his own pizza, Graham going in and paying for his supports at, or paying for his swim lessons, or when you saw Jessica paying for her Starbucks, right? And now Jessica's gotten high tech and she now orders her Starbucks on her app. And so it's all ready when she goes in there. Decreasing supports on the paid staff because she now doesn't need her paid staff to go with her. So even though Mercedes is always with her, right, we're decreasing support. This is absolutely my favorite. Big vans, lots of support, right? Lots of support. Next slide. But this, even though the staff might be with a person on a bus, decreasing the paid supports. Okay, go ahead. Okay, so this is Brett, and Brett said that he wants everybody to know that he is proud of himself, and we are very proud of Brett. So Brett used CE as a way to gain the kinds of skills he needed to become a great employee, and that's what he is, a great employee. He worked at Brookside Gardens as a volunteer, and he learned to take the bus. He took some classes, again, some of those deep breathing classes, some of those how to get himself centered. He learned responsibility. It was something we got to add to his resume. So he did this before he moved into a successful paying position. Next, we're going to share with you a little story about Brett.
Well, you can go first.
Hi, my name is Brett. Nice to meet you. I work at UPS warehouse.
Hi, my name is Willow Newman. I've been working with Brett here at UPS for almost 2 years through SEEC. Brett is an unloader. He unloads boxes from the conveyor belts. and is very good at his job. He's been here for almost 2 years.
Brett's a hard worker. He's in here every day. Brett has been a very diligent part of our unload force. You can always count on that he's going to be here. He knows what he wants to do. He comes in, asks for the truck, and goes right to the truck and goes working. He works very well with anyone that you put in there with the truck with him. Everyone in there has always had good experiences with Brett.
He's a funny guy. He's hilarious. He's actually pretty easy to talk to, especially when I was having a tougher day in the building. I could go and hammer out a truck with Brett and kind of reset my mind.
Well, I enjoy mostly here working with Brad. His ability to do the work, come into work happy, and making anyone account that he's here. When Brad come in, you know he's here. Because everybody hear him. He's like, I'm here. Did you clock in? Did you punch in? So that's the best thing that I love with him. He's happy all the time.
So he's very successful. I want to tell you a little story. I work with an organization in Kentucky, and they have a contract with UPS, and they are doing, I don't even know what they do. They do some sort of contract. So it's a group of people with disabilities come in and do the contract. And when I showed her this video, she said, how in the world did you get UPS to let somebody do that's the side of the organization. They never let anybody that we work with. And I said, you started off with a group of people with disabilities, and you said they need to be in a group and they need to have a supervisor with them all the time, and they're never going to undo that. That's the damage we do when we load people on a van and we bring them to a community rec center, or we load people on a van and we bring them to a job, is that they are not seen as individuals. They are not seen as individual contributors or able or sometimes even competent. And as a result, it's really, really hard to back out of those situations. So you got to start the right way: the competitive integrated employment, the individualization, the getting out of the way. All those things are really important as we start to rebuild and we start to build these infrastructures for you to remember. It's really hard to get out of the wrong way to do it. It's easier to start the right way and then build upon that. Okay, the next slide. So this was Brett now, okay? So now he has follow along for 12 months. He has some ongoing supports in case he needs it. He's got some community development services, although he doesn't really want to bother with it because he takes the Metro, I think he takes Metro Access to work, and then he takes Metro home. And when he does that, he doesn't have time for anybody else. He's got some money in his pocket. There's stores that he wants to go to. There's things he wants to do, things he wants to get. He doesn't have time. But we are trying to work with him on coming into a job club, a virtual job club in the afternoon when he gets home. And then he gets his residential supports from another provider. So I want to go to the next slide. And this is the, oh, I missed a slide, I guess. Sorry. I thought there was one more slide. That when Brett was getting the job, when he was in the process to get the job, he had Discovery 1, Discovery 2, Discovery 3. He had ongoing supports, and job development, ongoing supports, follow along, and CDS. That first year, that's when he was in the job development process. He had all those things. Okay, can you click again? Okay. So I have some activities that I want you to do, and for the people back in the office and joining us virtually, you can look at these and we'll kind of switch back and forth a little bit. For people in this room, I'd like you to just spend a few seconds talking together. Here's some assumptions that you got to map out the whole year. I think we heard that from Bernie, from Nick, and from the panel. You got to map out a whole year. Some things about job development. We at SEEC have an employer engagement team, or employer outreach team. It still says engagement. Employer outreach team, and they work with local employers. I think I have in the back here some of or our organizational structure, so you can see how we're structured. We have regional coordinators that know the geographic area. They're kind of like the case managers in employment services, and then we have job coaches. And the tracking of the process, that's one of the things, and you're going to hear from some LTSS folks this afternoon, but one of the most important things is to train your staff. And Stacy had a great solution where both the staff and the people you support, they're color-coded so that you make sure you're doing the billing right. But teaching your staff the definitions for the billing, they can handle it, trust me. They can handle it. But they have to know what it is so they know what activity they're doing when. And those individualized schedules will also really help. That's a great infrastructure tool, is those individualized schedules. Next. Okay. So here's the practice. This is Fred. It's not really his name. That's not really Fred. This isn't a real story. I just made this up. So this is Fred, and he's going to start services with employment services. And he moved here from California with his family, and he's been sitting at home waiting for services. He started hanging out with us in September, and his PCP is coming up. So you know we've already had the pre-planning, right? All you CCSs, you know we've already had pre-planning. Before he moved here, he worked at his uncle's bakery, but he had to get up like the donut man at 4 o'clock in the morning. And that's one of his cakes that he made. Nothing but cake. But he wants to keep baking, but he still wants to meet friends. He's new here. He doesn't know anybody. He wants to meet friends. He wants to get to know the area, and he doesn't want to get up at 4 in the morning anymore, right? He wants to work from noon to 4 if possible. That's his ideal. But he thinks that part-time work is really good so that he could maybe spend his mornings making connections with people in his new town. So what I'd like you to do is turn to one another for 5 minutes. And I'd like you to come up with some thoughts about how to create a budget. What would a year look like? Now, I'm going to have you go ahead like 3 slides here. So this is another story, another story. This is a little bit of what it should look like. You should have this kind of thing that you've developed, right? So you've got all of the services down one side and you've got the months across. That's kind of how you should be thinking about how you plan for a year, right? So how you plan for a year. So you want to put Fred back up for a second and think about this template. And I'm going to give you 5 minutes to come up with and talk with each other about how you would create that plan. As Alan said, I gave you lots of information about him. You don't start with the services. Services are last. Alan's absolutely right. Services are last. And you've got information about him. So how do you plan that into a service plan? So you got 5 minutes, go. Okay, about another minute. Okay. So did it help to speak through it? Did it help to speak to one another? Okay, before I ask you the next set of questions, I want to tell you something. We had to change our infrastructure. Our finance department and our program departments, they never really spoke. They used to like send an email back and forth and say, this is what the attendance was, done. But now they actually have to speak. And for us, it's hard because they're on different floors. So they're like coming up and down, and sometimes they're in different cities. But so you have to change how you do your business, right? Employment, services, and community engagement, they have to meet. They have to talk. And I'm going to share with you about some of the ways that we do that. We not only talk about this with our finance people, sit in on our PCP review that we do on a weekly basis, but after every month of billing, they send it back out to each of the program directors, and they sit down and they say, does this look right? Here's an anomaly we found. Is that anomaly correct? Oh yeah, she was away at camp for a month, so that's why she got nothing. Every month, we make sure that there's that communication. That's new in our infrastructure. We never did that before. We never had the kind of pre-planning. We spent 6 months creating a pre-planning process because the collaboration that has to happen is different than it was. And remember, you're not going to do it right in the beginning. You're going to make mistakes. It's going to be clunky. You'll get there. You'll learn. The other piece is the staff training is tremendous in this. Don't underestimate people. Most people, who, especially those graduating from school in the last 15 years, are digital natives. They've been dying to use technology. They want the opportunity to do that. We use the ICM system, and we also use SharePoint and Teams. And so our staff they carry laptops, they have cell phones, and a lot of them now are getting iPads because we're doing a lot of high-tech work with folks. And they also carry printers with them so that when Jessica, whose voice is not very recognizable when she goes someplace, she can take a picture, print it out, and then hand it to the staff. So we carry portable printers with us as well. Printers in the house so that everybody can put up a schedule so they know which staff person is coming in to work with them next. So high-tech and low-tech, little simple things too. So you have to change how you do your business. DDA created these policies to move our industry to best practices. Those things that John was talking about, the research that's happening at ICI and other organizations, to move us as a community into best practices, they had to change their policies. So you will find yourself saying that's not how we do things. You'll find yourself saying that. It's okay, but you do have to change how you do things. That's really important. CCSs have to change how they do things, how they cooperate and collaborate with the providers. Providers and families have to change how they communicate and interact. People that we provide supports to have to change what they think in terms of what their possibilities, opportunities, and options are, right? And same with the direct support staff. I will just tell you that we have a less than 20% turnover rate at SEEC. We have over 190 direct support staff, and we have less than a 1% vacancy. People have risen to the occasion. They are thrilled to have the opportunities to work autonomously, to use technology, and to use this training and opportunity. So don't underestimate what something good like this can happen when you work with your team on this. Okay, so does anybody really quickly want to say what were a couple of the services that you had? Any tables that you had for Fred? Anybody? Nobody? Nobody? Okay, how many people had Discovery 1, 2, 3? Raise your hand if you had. So a lot of people in this room raised their hand. Did anybody not put employment in this? Did anybody not put Discovery in here? Everybody had Discovery? Okay, Discovery 1, 2, 3. Did anybody have a CDS? Everybody had CDS? Okay, so, right, recognizing that stacking of the services, maybe it would look like this, is that a person would have CDS 100% of the time with a little bit of Discovery, and then the CDS hours would decrease and the ongoing hours would increase, right? Job development and ongoing, yeah. So using a template like I shared with you will help you to think through that. You want to go next slide? So these are two other examples. You have a copy, you will get a copy of this PowerPoint. Use them with your team back at the office. Use this as an opportunity to try some of this. Next slide. Next one. There are just a couple of them. Use this template if you want. Create your own. It's just kind of silly. It's a little easy little template. Next slide. Okay. So this is the structure that we use at SEEC for our employment services program. We have a program director and operations managers. Because of LTSS and ICM, we got to get the data right. We got to get the data right. So these are the people who do the attendance, the PCPs, they track it. That's a more intense. We used to only have one person do that, but now we have two, because you got to get it right. You got to get these done on time, right? Customized employment consultants. These are the people who do the discovery, job development, and initial support. Then they get handed over to the regional coordinator, and that's who the job coaches work for. They work for the regional coordinators. We have 5 regions. Montgomery County is huge, physically huge. And so we have 5 different regions. And they all have a group of people that they provide supports to that they're always kind of watching. This is just the structure we had. This is not the structure we had. We did what we call a renovation. We renovated our employment services 2 years ago. You have a question? Uh-huh. We support about 400 people every day. You're welcome. She asked how many people we support for those on the call. And again, we provide supports in both DC and in Maryland. So mostly Maryland, mostly supports in Maryland. Next. This is our community engagement. And as I said, Tona and Kelly are here and they're happy to answer questions. They like to talk about their wonderful teams and the successes that they've had and some of the struggles. I was at Tona's holiday party with his team the other day, and he was both bragging and lamenting that he's had 7 job coaches come in this year that have all been promoted within the organization. So good and bad, right? They were such amazing folks, and that they got promoted. Now he's got some openings for job coaches. We have an operations manager, again, that data person who's tracking the PCPs and the attendance. We have regional team leaders, and then we have the direct support specialists that we call community specialists. Next slide. This is a little bit about our infrastructure and how we collaborate. Next slide. Oop, back one. Okay, so we have a navigation team. They call it the NAV team. And they talk about who's next up for customized employment, and they talk about the structure of how people are going back and forth between things. So they meet on a regular basis. There's a ton of coordination between the departments, ton of coordination at the coordinator level, but also at the director level. They have shared staff, and we use this ICM system for the collaboration to be able to track all of that. So just wanted to share with you a little bit about that infrastructure. I think it's time for, next is, I had questions. Can we do questions? A few questions from people? If we give them the microphone?
How about 3 questions?
Okay, 3 questions. Okay, so you can go on to the next. Anybody have any questions about what we're talking about here? Yeah, here, I'm going to give you the microphone. Okay.
You do for the people online.
You ask the question and I'll repeat it. How do they get the slide presentation, Dr. Smalls? It's going to be attached? Okay. Anybody else? Question. Yeah, eye care managers, ICM is what we use, yeah. And we're about a year and a half into it, I think, that we've been using it. And we had a very structured, we have a very large IT department. We have 7 people in our IT department. We have a director, because everybody's got laptops. We use the, what's the system that we use for questions? We have an online tracking system. I can't remember what it was, for tracking all of the help desk things. So, yeah. 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 So she wants to know about personal supports and how we integrate that. And what I'll say to you is that is a great question to be held at a different time. We were really only talking about these, I'm so sorry. But we do braid and blend personal supports into these services with people. If it happens during the day, we tend to use these. We use personal supports for things that happen at home with somebody. So we may use personal supports for things like, we have a moving out program. It's a new process. It's a 6-month class that we have. It's part of transition. It was funded originally by the SPARC, the Arc of Maryland's innovation grants. And we have a 6-month transition program that we work with both the families and the people we support, and they can come on and they use their personal supports usually to pay for that. And they have a class once a month, and then they work on homework. And hopefully by the end, they're ready to move out into their own place. So in the same way that we have transitioning youth services like Project Search, where people get some employment supports and employment training before they go into jobs, we use the same strategies for our moving out. And so we do use personal supports for that. Anybody else? Last questions going once? Oh, Tona? Yeah. So Tona asked about something that I think a lot of providers are experiencing, and I think, if I'm not wrong, that's why we're having this discussion today with the CCSs, the regional offices, and the providers in the room. And his question is, these are really heavy loaded budgets. They've got a lot of stuff in it. And sometimes the CCS may think, that's way too many services. If they're going to do work, why in the world do they need CDS? Or if they're working, why do they need CDS? Well, that's why we're here today, to say not only is it allowed, but we're encouraging it. We want to see that. We want to see that mix of services so that, and as Alan said so well, we start with the person and then we add the services. You should always be able to justify it because you can always tell the story about what the person said they wanted. So if you start with the person and add the services, once you hear from what they want, then it should be clear. We need to make sure that's clearly written so that when it gets to the regional office, they can translate what's written about what the person says they want with what the services are. We heard that, I think Kathy said, that's got to be clear. And that's some of the reasons why sometimes they don't accept them, because that translation isn't clear. So we just need to make sure that that's really clear. So. I think that's it. So thank you very much. And thanks to my colleague, John, who joined us from Boston today. And I hope you don't get bad snow and snowed in up there, John. But thank you very much. Thanks for.
Take care, everybody. And thank you, Karen.
So, Karen, John, thank you so much. I think you set up a good segue into the next panel where we're going to talk about going into LTSS. And I think one thing I would just say about that and what Karen was just talking about is, you know, we absolutely do reinforce and want to make sure that everybody in this room knows that we want, expect, should see stacking, braiding, blending, flexibilities to help meet people's needs and what they want to do in their life. And that is across the board. We're having those conversations in the regions. We're having the conversations at headquarters. We're having the conversations here. So they're happening. We're going to go through this together. We have invested in putting all of these services, these very innovative best practice services into LTSS. Let's use them in the way that they were intended to be used. So we're going to take a 15-minute break. You can get some cookies out in the hall.